In today's episode of the Python Presents podcast, I have an interesting guest here with me today. I'm with Barton, and he is basically working on content and marketing over at the folks at babelforce. And babelforce, they're basically making service easy for customers, agents, and obviously your business as well. So we want to figure out how they basically help teams to simplify and really master and handle customer service to drive their growth. Jack, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course, yeah. So give us a quick overview. What's the product all about? What you guys are doing?
Sure. So babelforce is a platform for customer experience. babelforce is a platform for customer experience teams, generally within a call center setting. And we enable people on the front lines of customer service and sales to add a really transformative automation to their work. Our USP is the fact that we're a no-code platform. Mm-hmm. So the people who use babelforce have the ability to refine and to customize their customer service processes with the same kind of scope that you would have from a software developer, but without having to spend years becoming a software developer. So it's that same kind of flexibility, but with tools that are more intuitive, visual-based tools that essentially anyone can learn to use.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Now, which types of organizations do you work with? Because obviously there's tons of organizations that need good customer service, but maybe tell us a little bit about is there specific, size, specific industries where you feel, and you mentioned already the call center component to it, obviously, where it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So in terms of industry, it is virtually any industry. That's not something we particularly refine against because everyone has customer service and everyone has call centers. So most of our clients would be in finance, in technology, in tourism, any industry that really takes its customer service very, very seriously, that needs to reach out to people, immediately from an initial inquiry, or that needs to be making a very high volume of outbound contacts, or sending the right people to the right agents at exactly the right time. So the more serious they are about having extremely precise, defined, automated services happening, the more likely they are to come to us. So what we generally refine by then is actually the size of the organization. And we focus on enterprises. So it tends to be people with extremely large customer bases. But specifically, our filter is the number of customer service agents that they have. So if we're looking at a call center with thousands of agents, that's absolutely a good fit. Hundreds is almost always an extremely good fit, even down to a few dozen. There are a surprising number of 5-person call centers in the world. You'd be amazed. And they are basically never a particularly good fit because the kind of problems they have, we can always show them an easier way to solve the sort of problems that they encounter.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Now, within those organizations, who would typically be the individual that says, we need something like babelforce? Is that sort of, the head of the call center? Is that even coming more from the CX or the customer success or services teams? Where does the demand come from?
Yeah, so it's a combination of the two. We break it down internally into the movers and the makers. So the movers are those head of people. They will be, the VP of something like CX or of sales. They could be even, someone in the C-suite, someone who has a particular but broad kind of remit around customer experience. And their objectives are those very generalized customer experience goals. And they're the movers, and they actually, they'll control the budget. In addition to that, we have the makers, and the makers are the more operational people. So they're the people who will actually use our product, day to day. They're the people who have a very specific set of goals that they're trying to achieve. So it's about how quickly can we answer the phones? How much automation can we bring into our processes? So they're not the people who actually end up signing the checks. They will be relatively junior in the overall makeup, but they are exactly as important in terms of who we need to convince. If you can't convince the makers, then no one's convincing the movers.
No, that makes sense. Okay, so how do these guys learn about babelforce? Like, what's their journey typically looking like in order to, actually come across you guys in the first place?
Yeah, it can be a long journey. It really can. We have a pretty long education cycle, and that's most of what we focus on in marketing. We've done very little around lead generation so far because we have put so much time and effort into demand gen. We really need people to come into us with a great deal of understanding of what it is that we're actually trying to provide. So we have a very strongly content-led approach. What we put out into the world is increasingly video. We have much better results. Sort of per dollar return is much, much better if we can put a few videos of our CEO, of our head of sales out into the world. Obviously, we cover all the usual bases. You can't get away with not having a blog. So that's an increasingly big part of what we do as well. A lot of downloadable content, although increasingly we remove the gating from that. So we're actually spending less time trying to harvest people's emails and a lot more time just trying to get them as educated as possible. And it's one of the issues that we have, one of the interesting challenges that we have, that there aren't a lot of products like us in our space. This no code space tends to be occupied by software development teams, or website development is where you see a lot of no code. But for us, we're relatively unique. And that's great once you've got people in the door, once you've got people talking, they're surprised and impressed by what we can offer. But at that first stage, that educational stage, there's not enough comparison for us to actually, we can never assume that people know what it is that we're offering them in advance. That's our major challenge.
That makes sense. Now, what role do you think in that journey that you just described? Like, what role does the website play? How do you think about the website in that terms?
Yeah, I mean, the website is huge. It's it's a hub for everything else. If you can't get the website right, then fundamentally none of your other efforts are really going to fall into place. And it's certainly been my biggest headache in the last, I think, 3.5 years at babelforce, is the speed at which you can make meaningful change to the website, the speed at which you can diagnose what's working, what's not working. It's very easy to put months and months into what will turn out to be a failed effort if you have the wrong information to draw from. That's certainly something I've learned. If you get anecdotal information from within the company, you decide to move on it, you develop a whole suite of pages with sub-pages with this entire flow. If it turns out that anecdotal information was flawed, you can waste huge amounts of effort. And I've definitely been there a few times by now. So we focus a lot on the repeatability of what we can do on the website. How quickly could we put out something new? Can we do this again, but with a different target in mind that will be a lot more successful? So yeah, the website is sort of is where I live and die day to day.
Any tips for other marketers that help them, or what would you do to detect on whether you're sort of on the wrong way or on the right way with the content? Well, from what you described there, is there anything that you've been learning over the years that sharpened your senses in that regard?
Sure. So I think one of the things with increasing seniority in a company as you move up the ranks, you're in a sense you're less answerable over time. So what I try and do is explain to the people who are on my team who have to explain their work to me. I try and explain my work to them, because it's very easy to operate on the assumptions of your own experience. So I write really extensive briefs for work that I'm actually going to do myself, but I brief it as if it's going to a freelancer or going to someone on my team. I write an analysis as if I have to convince myself, because it's amazing how quickly you identify your own blind spots. There's an element on the website that I want, that I think would look good, that I think would reflect well on me, that I've produced it. But once I've actually done the analysis that I would expect anyone else to do, more often than not, I can see this is a vanity product, or it's something that comes in 6 months' time. It's not something we should be doing right this second, because there's something simpler and probably more boring that we should be doing today.
I mean, great answer. And I think that helps a lot of people out there listening in. So now, since you're in depth working on the page, right? The website is always a moving piece of work, right? There's some strengths to it. There's some room for improvement. Where do you currently sort of see, its biggest strength versus where do you see, for the room for improvement?
So with the website in particular, the biggest strength is probably how we have been able to fix people up with product-specific information. Because finding where they start and where they end, that's been a journey for us. But having put in that work, I think we're actually in a really good position now. We do tend to find, and again, this is anecdotal, but we do tend to find that once people are in the room with the sales team, when they're actually closing deals, they can almost always point us in the direction of specific pieces of content or specific parts of the website that substantially moved them towards making that appointment. So there are often specific videos, again, that are on the website, specific pages, specific blog posts that they say, was the tipping point for them. But in terms of weakness, there is the overall user experience. There are whole parts of the site still now where it's not clear what action you're supposed to take next. There are areas where there is effort involved in understanding what it is we want you to do next. And effort is fundamentally the enemy of all good user experiences. It's friction, and friction is exactly not what you want.
Mm. Yeah, that brings me actually to the next question. Sort of over the years, what have you learned? Can be with the current website or other roles that you were in. What have you learned? What are great like methods, tools, approaches to actually ensure that there's not too much effort and that they actually start to convert into what the demos or whatever it might be on the page? Anything that you figured out and came across and learned over the years?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you do have to A/B test everything. And that is challenging when you're, especially in early days, when you're starting out with a smaller team or when you're trying to make something happen off your own back. Every time you A/B test, you're essentially doing your work twice. It's a very difficult habit to get into, but you do have to do it. You do have to find out what specifically isn't working. And then when you find what does work, you just have to do it again. And it's mindlessly frustrating, especially when the results can be quite minimal. The difference between A and B sometimes is actually negligible, and then you have to make a decision on the roll of a dice, of what you actually want to pursue. As for what I would advise anyone else to do, for me, it's always been about maximum repeatability. So every page we have built, every piece of copy we have written, every workflow that we can establish has actually worked. That will then pop up everywhere. The templating is maximally efficient for us. We don't currently have a designer in-house, so you absolutely need to grind every single dollar out of every different piece of collateral that you have made.
Fantastic. I mean, it seems like a very structured approach the way you guys are working in the babelforce marketing team. So that's very cool. I would like to switch gears a little bit and talk with you. We talked about the company, we talked about growth, we talked about channels. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your role as a marketer, your daily business, but also your development over time. Maybe tell me high level, sort of what are all the different types of projects that you're involved in on a daily basis. We see marketers sometimes being overloaded with tons of projects. Sometimes they're very laser focused on one or two things. How does it look like for you on a daily basis?
Oh yeah, no, totally. We can be wildly overburdened with tasks sometimes, and a big task breaks down into 100 small tasks. You find yourself chipping away at something and realizing at the end of the week, I actually didn't achieve very much by doing that. I'm not sure what the ultimate goal was there. So at the highest level, what I do is break everything into 4 categories that I'm genuinely interested in, which would be performance, brand, community, and product. So the first step for me is always defining something within those terms. Are we doing specific product marketing? Is this about developing the brand in general? Is it part of our community efforts? Or is it part of the math stuff, the performance marketing stuff? Having that filter in place has been really, really helpful for me, because it means at the end of every week, at the end of every month, at the end of every quarter, we can say, did we do something in each category? Or have we been doing the easier stuff or the more fun stuff?
Do you mind to repeat the categories for the listeners, just in case they haven't?
Absolutely. So the categories that I work with are product, community, brand, and performance. Mm-hmm. And it's as simple as having a huge whiteboard in my office. And every time we do something in that category that week, it gets written down in the whiteboard just so I can keep a top level view of it. And if you get to the end of the week and you realize brand is the only column that's still empty, then it's really quick to establish that you've actually been, mixing your attention and not focusing on certain areas.
Very cool. I got some rapid fire questions for you to wrap it up for the day. Are you ready for those?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. What's
the last book that you read?
So I read Into the Woods by John York, which is a book about storytelling. I don't tend to read masses of marketing specific books. I read a lot of stuff online, listen to podcasts, but when it comes to books, I find it far more beneficial to read things that are about storytelling, because it's really easy to forget how important storytelling is within marketing.
Mm-hmm. What is the one single thing that your company is focused on the most at the moment?
Well, that would be brand. Actually, as a top line ambition, building the brand is super important right now. We're going through a really important growth stage at the moment, and brand is quite easy to neglect because it's so hard to define. So it's really important for us to pin down at the moment. Everything from the kind of collateral, how do we expect freelancers to talk about us, right up to how do we present ourselves to the world at the level of the CEO and CTO.
Anything that you found particularly helpful for that brand building, work? Any resources, books, exercises?
Well, we've actually worked with some really good video agencies that have helped us a lot. that have provided training that have helped us to actually create like really, really consistent videos that don't actually have to either cost thousands and thousands of dollars each or take all that much time. So we have a really good flow now where I work with both the head of sales and the CEO to produce video content every single week for both of them. And because it's so structured, it's so formalized, it's actually very easy to turn out on an ongoing basis, as long as you're disciplined about it.
And for the very last question, I'd like to do a little bit of time travel with you, right? Let's go back to the days of Aberystwyth University. I hope I said it in the right way.
Wow, yeah, you've done your research.
I'm not just so sure if I pronounced it correctly though, but let's say yes. So let's go back to those days, right? And you're heading out of formal education into the world of growth and marketing and content and writing, right? A big part of your career as well. What's the one advice you would give yourself for your journey?
Yeah, so initially I was more in the copywriting, content writing space. There's tons of advice that I actually just got out of really good books. I wouldn't bother with that. What I would tell myself with the more managerial mindset, the more planning mindset, would be say no more often to more people. Because I think, especially coming out of that agency background, I'm sure lots of marketers have this, you get used to saying yes to everything because you're doing it on a client's behalf. You are obliged to say yes to the unreasonable piece of work that comes in at lunchtime and has to be finished before you go home for the day. But once it's your responsibility, once you're accountable, everything needs to be sensible. Everyone needs to prove, and whoever they are, this goes for the very most senior people in your company. If they come to you and say, it'd be great if we could develop an app around this, or if, our next product launch had a video game attached to it, or a hardback book, you have to say no almost all of the time. Very few of these ideas are sensible. If you're fortunate, like I am, to be in a company with a lot of well-grounded people, it'll turn out that most of their even really wild ideas do have a strong basis in reality, but you still got to get them to prove it.
I think that's a very, very good advice for marketers out there. Jack, I really appreciate you took the time with us to be a guest on Pathmark Presents. I want to give you the very last word. If somebody would be forgetting all about babelforce, what we discussed today, what's the one thing that they should remember?
Look, we are the most flexible version of what we are in the world. And that's really super important to us. There's no other customer service contact center platform that offers the kind of range and flexibility that we can offer.
Thanks a lot for being a guest on Pathmark Presents.
Thank you.